everyone, I am Zero and welcome to Combo One. Straight to the point, what do you think of when I say Wizards deck? The odds are you picture a Inalla deck with her Eminence trigger abusing wizards entering the battlefield, Neromiha buffing your creatures and tokens, and Naban providing a panharmonic effect. Maybe even an old Wonderwine Prophet combo for infinite turns. No? Maybe a Zami Lady of Scrolls then, for all the card draw you may want, with supporting cards like Patron Wizard, which is a counterspell on a stick, the famous Stonybrook Banneret making your wizard's draw engines cheaper, and an eventual Lab Maniac as a win con. Or if you really love your recent standard decks, maybe a Viviorniteer, a pinging Spellslinger deck with the likes of Snapcaster Mage, maybe a Niv Mizzet Curiosity combo, even taking advantage of the non-infinite synergy that Curiosity also has with Vivi's static ability. Whatever the commander you thought of, I am sure your Wizards deck featured blue. Wizards, after all, are the creature type that we mostly associate with control magic, non-creature spells and even card draw, so surely there's no effective way to play Wizards without blue, right? By the time you finish this video, you'll be ready to see Alessia or Zurgo taking the Hogwarts Express, because we are building a Mardu Wizards deck led by CELES, RUNE KNIGHT. The recent Final Fantasy addition to the roster of Magic is a 4-mana 4/4 human wizard knight. When she enters, you discard any number of cards. Then you draw the same number of cards plus 1. And then, whenever one or more creatures enter the battlefield from the graveyard, you put a +1/+1 counter on every creature you control. Out of the bat, this makes me think of Reanimator, and it gives me Alessia vibes. But this is a Wizards Kindred deck, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. We are playing the traditional cards you'd expect in a Kindred deck, just slightly off color for Wizards. Coat of Arms grows our creatures +1/+1 for each creature they share a type with, but it's symmetrical, so be aware. If you are playing against a lot of other Kindred decks, this is an expensive card, so it's an easy cut if you find yourself playing it into your opponent's strategy. Banner of Kinship checks how many wizards we control and enters with that many fellowship counters, then your wizards all get +1/+1 for each counter on it. It's good with Proliferate, as well as the counters that CELES gets on our creatures, but I stayed clear of that sub-theme to focus on wizards. We also tried to ramp with appropriate cards like Patchwork Banner that taps for any color, as it also buffs our wizards. We then also have cards like Urza's Incubator that makes our wizards 2 mana cheaper to cast, and Herald's Horn that only gets us a 1 mana discount, but it helps us dig to get more wizards. Then, Icon of Ancestry is yet another way to buff our creatures and dig further to get more of them into play. Let me just make a note right here. I've built this deck as if I was having my own playgroup and budget in mind. And while the overall value of the deck is higher than I would usually buy in singles for one single deck, I already own some of the most expensive cards since I have an old collection. In any case, you'll see notable missions like the Soulstone, Portal to Phyrexia, traditional fetch lands, because I want the deck to feel realistic for the average player rather than a budgetless all the good stuff deck. For that, you have EDH track. And with that out of the way, let's dive in the deck's inner workings and let's look at CELES once again. Specifically, that second ability, because we only run one creature that has nothing to do with wizards, and that CELES ability is what justifies its inclusion. I am talking, of course, about Sheoldred, Whispering One, a card that keeps finding a way into my decks, and for good reason. She's one of the best Reanimator cards available in EDH, and that's unconditional fuel to CELES' second ability. Then, cards like Roaming Throne aren't wizards to start off, but will become wizards on the battlefield. This one is a pricey card, but you can't really build a proper Kindred deck without one Roaming Throne these days. But what triggered abilities are we talking about here? What wizards are we really playing? We're running white. Well, for starters, we have Harmonic Prodigy, which is basically another instance of Roaming Throne. Then we have Terra, Herald of Hope, which lets us pay 2 whenever she deals damage to reanimate something up to 3 mana value, which is most of our creature base. And then literal bombs like Basalt Ravager that will deal damage to any target equal to the number of wizards we control when it enters. We'll have wizards to sack other wizards like Viscera Seer, and we'll have wizards that want to sack themselves like Magus of the Will or Magus of the Will. We'll have wizards that care about drawing cards like Dark Confidant, like Disciple of Bolas, or even the white Rumor Gatherer that gains us life, and if more than one creature enters the battlefield in one turn, it also draws us cards. We'll have wizards that care about non-creature spells being cast, like Dreadlord Harkenist, who's willing to reuse those non-creature spells. Storm Splitter, that's creating copies of itself like a furry Scoot Swarm, as we storm off with those non-creature spells. Or even Fandaniel, Teleforoyasian, who I challenged myself to pronounce, mostly because I am sure there is no proper way to say this card's name. As most Kindred decks, we run Metallic Mimic, Adaptive Automaton, and Bloodline Pretender, which are just further threats making our wizards bigger, or, in the case of the Pretender, making itself bigger with our wizards. But before we round off our wizards package, let me just shine a light on a few pivotal support cards in the deck. Molten Echoes and Flame Shadow Conjuring are here to make token copies of our wizards. As we've seen, the deck is built to grow our wizards really big, so this will both add to our firepower and to our wizard count, which will matter for cards like Basalt Ravager. There's also a Brass's Tunnel Grinder here, which will take advantage from all our discard and sacrifice synergies, while being an additional way to dig deeper into our deck. We also need to cover the Reanimation package with the traditional Reanimate, Finale of Eternity, and even Rise of the Dark Realms, which is awfully expensive, but remember, we have a lot of effects that allow us to discard cards into our graveyard, and if we get to a point where both we and our opponents have a lot of cards in our graveyard, Rise of the Dark Realms is simply 9 mana, you win the game. And circling back to the wizards, the reason I saved a few for the end is because these are our main win conditions. If we have any sack outlet, for simplicity's sake, let's say it's Goblin Bombardment, we can cast Sevin's Reclamation to reanimate something. Then we cast Dual Caster Mage in response, copying Sevin's Reclamation. So now we have the original spell we cast with a trigger on the graveyard and the copy. With the copy still on the stack, we sack Dual Caster Mage to Goblin Bombardment and we deal 1 damage anywhere. Now we have Sevin's Reclamation and the copy. We need to define a target for the copy. We target the Dual Caster Mage we just sacked. Dual Caster Mage gets back on the battlefield and we only have the original Sevin's Reclamation still to resolve. Dual Caster Mage then will target the original Sevin's Reclamation again and make a new copy. Again, we sack Dual Caster Mage, we deal 1 more damage, and we repeat this loop infinitely until the outcome of your specific sack outlet allows you to actually win the game. Alternatively, there's a Bloodline Necromancer in here. As it enters with Molten Echoes on the battlefield, we get 2 triggers. The first one, Bloodline Necromancer reanimates something. The second one, Molten Echoes makes a copy of the Bloodline Necromancer. We can then sack the original Bloodline Necromancer to any sack outlet and let the copy resolve, targeting the Bloodline Necromancer that's freshly in our graveyard. As it returns to the battlefield, the loop will start all over again, with Molten Echoes providing a fresh copy of the Bloodline Necromancer, resulting in us reanimating our whole graveyard and getting as many hasty copies of the Necromancer as we might need. Which leads us to the final and my favorite of our win cons, which is Puppeteer Click, because this wizard has the best possible keyword for a Celes deck in Persist, because if it dies, it reanimates itself with a -1/-1 counter, except if Celes is on the battlefield, all our creatures get a +1/+1 counter, because the Puppeteer Click came back from the graveyard, which effectively will nullify its Persist -1/-1 counter, allowing it to come back infinitely, reanimating something from our opponent's graveyards each time it comes back on the battlefield, and making our board infinitely big in the process. Of course, for this, we also need any sack outlet, as for any of these combos, and Celes on the battlefield will always help. As any of these combos need a sack outlet, there are a few in the deck. Goblin Bombardment is the best simply because it deals damage as a result, so any infinite loop results in infinite damage. In any case, we are also running Impact Tremors, can replace Goblin Bombardment in conjunction with any other outlet. Ashnod's Altar makes infinite colorless mana, and Viscera's Seer infinite scries, so in theory, we could even reorder our deck into any way that we want, but if we are already infinitely looping, I don't think that we'll need it. And Warren Soul Trader is not quite infinite because we need to pay life, but it makes as many treasures as we are willing to pay life for. And if we have Rumor Gatherer, a creature entering the battlefield offsets the costs of life that we pay to make a treasure. If we are looping, one offsets the other, and then Warren Soul Trader is infinite. Of course, resulting in infinite colored mana in the form of treasures. And going back to the interaction with the Persist mechanic, while we only run Puppeteer Click with native Persist, we do have a Cauldron of Souls that will save our board from most board wipes once between each of our turns, or that will allow us to basically cycle through death and ETB triggers for all of our creatures once in each of our turns. Of course, going into Lorwyn, we'll have access to the new god Isilu, Carrier of Twilight, which will turn any and all of our creatures into a combo piece. This card is not in the deck right now because it's not yet legal, but it's an auto-include for this deck just as soon as it comes out. And as this is an unexpected Wizards deck, it's appropriately called your Wizard CELES, and it's some of what you'd expect a CELES deck to look like, or even a Terra deck for that matter, but with a hugely explosive Wizards package inside. Your opponent might be expecting some sort of a Reanimator strategy looking at your commander, but I am sure they won't see half a dozen 2024 AST Storm Splitters coming their way. I, for one, if not for the Archidekt challenge, wouldn't think of building a Kindred deck led by CELES. Firstly, because it's been a long time since I brewed any kind of Kindred decks, honestly, but mostly because I would never think of building a blueless Wizards deck, much less one that's Mardu, possibly one of the most notorious aggro 3-color combination in Magic. And I actually am really proud of how this turned out. Keeping in mind that we built it both top-down and bottom-up, playing to both our commander's abilities, and the idea that we wanted to make the most of our wizards working together, I think the middle ground where the two ends meet is really solid, and this is a bracket 3 deck that I'm seriously considering adding to my personal paper collection. So, what do you think? Would you play this deck? Let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't, please like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep up with future videos, and in the meantime, if you enjoy the content, take a look at some of these showing up on your screen. Thank you very much for being there, and until next time, keep comboing on.